Hi friends and welcome back. My name is Margot Halleck and today I'll be sharing my tips and techniques for how to photograph your work in a professional flat lay style. Ever seen those amazing pictures on Instagram or in magazines where everything is beautifully arranged and elegantly presented in a bird's eye view? Well, those are known as flat lays. They can highlight your work, tell a story, and they're so much fun to create. I love using them, and speaking from personal experience, I can't stress enough how important it is to present your work in as polished a way as possible. Whether you're starting a business or you have a hobby and you want to share your pictures with family and friends, the way you photograph your work can make the difference on whether or not you make a sale and whether or not people will respond and engage with your photographs on Instagram. So today I'm going to teach you my tricks and secrets for how to photograph your work in an overhead flat lay style. Doesn't matter if you are an artist, a baker, or if you knit socks or make jewelry. This tutorial applies to anyone who wants that beautiful styled look in a home DIY setting. Before we get started, please take a second to hit the subscribe button. As a YouTube creator, it makes a huge difference in helping me grow my channel and helps me create more amazing videos for you guys. Okay, let's talk about what we'll need to create these beautiful flat lays. Number one most important thing is either a camera, or if you don't own one, a smartphone with a built-in camera, like an iPhone, for example. And number two is your subject matter, of course. So whatever it is you're looking to photograph. The first thing to think about is the story you want your photo to tell. Don't panic. Telling a story doesn't have to be super complicated or literal, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears or something. What I mean by story is setting a mood or even a color scheme to build your photograph around. So think of what you're shooting and what makes sense for that subject matter. If you bake cupcakes for children's birthday parties, for example, you probably want it to feel colorful, bright, and happy. On the other hand, if you craft leather belts for men, you probably want something moodier and more masculine with textures like wood or burlap. Either way, a great place to start is by figuring out your background first. Look around your house or your apartment and see if you have a nice looking surface, like a wooden table or maybe a countertop to use as a backdrop. If you don't have access to either one of those, a great and super cheap solution is buying a sheet of foam core from the drugstore. You can actually buy them for maybe less than $2, so it's really cheap and versatile. If you're like me and you want to take it a step further and maybe level up your supplies, I buy a roll of vinyl surface with a marble pattern from a company called Style & Co. And it really helps me build a mood and ambiance in my shots. Next up are objects and props to complement your piece. You don't need many, and if your background is really cool, you might not need any at all. You can be resourceful by looking around your house or your apartment and seeing what you have. And I guarantee you that you have more than you think if you really take the time to think about it. Some other ideas for props to inspire you are things like dinnerware, so plates, for example, placemats, trays, coffee table books, and vintage books with cool covers make a great decorative prop. Pine cones, acorns, flowers, leaves, and last but not least, if you don't have any of those items that I just mentioned, you can use tools or accessories that you use in your craft. So for me, that would be things like paintbrushes, colored pencils, palettes, tubes, or paint, and those also make great styling props. The next most important thing is lighting. Lighting can make or break a photo. Now, you might think that you need some professional lighting setup to get a good photograph, but the truth is that daylight can work just as well and is way more convenient. Find a window in your space that gets a decent amount of light. If you don't have a window that gets good light, then I recommend shooting outside, either early in the morning or late in the afternoon before sunset. And that's because the light is the softest during those times. In fact, those times of the day are known in the professional photo and video industry as golden hour because the light becomes like a natural softbox that looks really smooth and very flattering for photos. You generally don't want to have direct sunlight because that can look really harsh and create unwanted shadows on your photos. So for me, I shoot all of my flat lays on a table close to a window, and the results are really amazing. Now that we have everything we need, let's put it all together. Before you start arranging your items, I suggest establishing the orientation of your photo first, because that's going to influence your layout and how you place all your items. So if you're going with a portrait orientation, for something like Instagram, for example, you would arrange everything much more vertically than if you were going with a landscape orientation. With that said, now I'm going to demonstrate how I put together two different flat lays. You'll see my thought process, how I pick out my various props, and I'll show you exactly how I assemble everything together. For flat lay number 1, I'll be using this painting as the focal point that I want to highlight. I start by looking at my painting and figuring out what mood or story I want to tell. This painting takes place in a forest, and the colors are quite vibrant and saturated with a lot of pinks and purples, so I'm thinking I want my mood to feel bright, colorful, and maybe bring in an element of nature somehow. Okay, so to start, I have this tray that I filled with various items from around my house. And I selected them because they each have something that I think pairs really nicely with my painting. Like I mentioned before, I love using books and book covers for styling. And so you can either use the exterior of the book, or if you open up the book and there's some beautiful pictures on the inside, those can be used to style your photograph as well. So don't just think about the cover, also consider what's on the inside as well. If you look closely, you'll notice that the color palette for the illustration on the outside of the book matches my painting. And so that is a perfect example of how you can tie in a color palette or color story just by looking for items that match the object that you're looking to photograph. And I won't lie, I got really, really excited when I saw that these matched so perfectly. It's kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. So next up, I have a couple of smaller items like this pine cone that I picked up from my yard. And obviously you can pick up things like pine cones, leaves, flowers from outside, and that's for free. And I have a couple of tools of the trade, so brushes and some paints. And the paints I specifically picked because, again, I want to tie that into my color scheme. So I picked a purple and a green so that they match my painting. You want to make sure that everything is considered when you start selecting your objects. And then I have these two items that have gold in them, so this trinket tray and this placemat, which I think will complement the yellow in my painting really well. I work on the background texture first, so I know I have this beautiful marbled texture background as well as this placemat. So I set those down first, and then I'm going to take my painting, or whatever your object of focus is, and place it on that background. Now, before you start moving things around, you want to figure out the orientation of your photograph. So will this be a vertical photograph or a horizontal one? Because you want your composition to work really well with whatever orientation you're going with. So in my case, I'm going with a vertical orientation for Instagram. If you've noticed, my placemat is not perfectly in the center underneath my painting, and that's because I don't want too much of it to get covered by both the painting and this book of flowers, which I'll be placing above the painting. So I usually like working from large object to small object. I move them around like puzzle pieces, trying to figure out what composition I like and what looks balanced. One thing that helps me is finding geometry in my items. So wherever I see perpendicular and parallel lines, and sticking to a grid format wherever I can. For this trinket tray, which is the next largest object in my stack, as you can see, the top of the Eiffel Tower forms a little bit of a vertical line in itself. So I see that right there, there's that vertical, and I want to make that parallel to the side of my artwork. And that will make your photo look more grounded when you start adding items like this pine cone, for example, which won't necessarily follow that grid. I'm noticing that this pine cone actually has a little irregularity here, so I'm rotating it so that the best side of it is facing the camera. Although I did a grid for most of my larger objects, I'm going to be breaking the rules here a little bit so it looks more natural and, ironically, less staged. So let's move on to our smallest items. And so right here, I'm creating another parallel, again, following that grid, placing it underneath my painting, and then adding another paintbrush and having that one connect with my focal point by having them overlap. And that helps to really tie everything together and make everything look like it's one cohesive image. Then I have my 2 paint tubes, and I'm gonna experiment a little bit and see what I like best. And there's a fair amount of experimentation here and just, moving things around and seeing what you like best and what works best for your composition. Right now I like them being grouped together, so let's just stick with that. And then I'll grab my iPhone or camera and try to get the lens to be as parallel to the ground or your surface as possible, and then take the picture. This picture was taken with my iPhone, but you can take the same setup and use a high-quality DSLR or mirrorless camera and have amazing results. And if you want to spice things up and photograph your content from an angle, you can do that as well. Now that we did that, let me take you through another example. My second flat lay will be a darker, moodier photograph. Okay, so my next flat lay will be for this other ballerina painting that has a blue and green color scheme. And just like for the previous example, I gathered a bunch of props and different accessories from around my house, including this book on botanicals that has some really cool inner pages, and I think that the style will really work hand in hand with my painting. Then, working from big to small, like in our previous example, I have this beautiful plate from Wedgwood that has this blue and gold decorative border, which I think ties in really well with the painting because it has a reflective sheen to it, which, in my opinion, goes really well together. Let's put these off to the side and go to the next item on our list. And I apologize if this is a little bit like show and tell, but it's just to give you an idea of how and why I select all these various items so that it all makes sense. Here I have a dish that has the shape of a leaf, and I think that ties into the whole forest vibe. My painting also happens to have a lot of leaves in it too, so that's extra bonus points. Let's add some texture too. I have this ribbon from Chanel, which I got from a sample order online actually. So I think it's gonna add some really nice shimmer and maybe a high fashion feel too. We're getting to our final props, and this is one of my favorite things, which is a collection of hand-painted swatch cards that I use when I'm painting. So I actually use these cards when I'm painting my artwork, and then when it comes time to style, then they double as styling props. So double duty here, which is great. So I have a blue and a yellow color that I picked out to match my plate. And of course that's intentional because I want to weave the whole color scheme together cohesively. And then to finish up, I have this fan brush and a gold chopsticks holder that I got off eBay. Just like with the previous example, let's start with the background first. And for this, I'm going to be using a piece of black foam core, which should help with creating a certain mood that I'm going for, which I think should be a dark forest kind of feel for this painting. I'm going to reach for my botanical book now and try to find a nice inner page to use in this staging. The inner pages in this book are absolutely gorgeous, and there's one in particular that I have in mind that has this beautiful dark foliage texture, so I'm going to be using that. And I'm going to place my artwork onto the book, trying to figure out what layout works best for a vertical setup. So this is going to be another Instagram photo. I placed my book off to the side because I'm making room for my next prop, which is this beautiful plate. I actually collect plates that I use for mixing palettes, and this one still has some paints on it, so that'll give it some nice texture. Okay, so now let's move our objects around and try to figure out a composition that looks nice. I wish I could say there was an exact science for how to arrange everything, but there's a fair amount of trial and error. Again, moving from large items to small, I'm going to lay down my Chanel ribbon, and I'm not going to lay it flat, I'm actually going to roll it up to give it more dimension. And then I'm going to wrap things up with the smallest items that I have and just intersperse them here and there and try to figure out where I can fill out any negative space in a way that looks nice and harmonious. Now let's take a picture and call it a day. Once I'm done photographing my work, I usually bring my photos into an app called Adobe Lightroom afterwards. I'm going to link it below, and I would definitely recommend downloading it to edit your photos. I have the paid version, but they offer a free version as well, and it makes a huge difference in polishing and guaranteeing the best possible outcome for your photos. I hope this video equipped you with all the necessary tools and tips to go out there and make your own flat lay photos. If you do, please tag me. I'd love to see what you came up with. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Keep creating, and I'll see you next time.